Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you are in this world. And thank you for joining us for today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm your moderator, Charlene O'Hanlon, and I welcome you to the event. We have a great panel discussion on tap for you today, and I'm really excited about this. But before we do get started, we need to go over just a few housekeeping items. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be receiving a link in an email after the event that will take you to the webinar on demand. And also, we are taking audience questions. So at any time during the event, you have a question for any of our panelists, just use your control panel, submit your question, and then we'll take probably about 15 minutes or so near the end of the event, and we'll go through the audience questions. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and get started with today's webinar, which is DevOps-ing the Mainframe, a panel discussion. As I said before, this is a panel discussion, so with that in mind, we do have three really great panelists today who are going to hopefully expound on DevOps and the mainframe and the benefits thereof. Our first panelist today is Rosalind Radcliffe. She's Chief Architect for DevOps for Enterprise Systems at IBM. And we have Ziv Avidan, who is Chief Product Officer at OpenLegacy. And finally, Dana Boudreau, who is Senior Director, DevOps Product Management at CA. Welcome to you, all three of you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here. Looking forward to it.
Great, great.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I said before, this is about DevOps-ing the mainframe, and it's the content and discussion today is going to be based in part on the content that's in DevOps.com's latest ebook, which is now available via download on DevOps.com. And also attendees or people who registered for today's webinar will also be receiving a copy via a download link following the webinar. So everything we talk about here, you should be able to find actually in the ebook as well. So, good information in that. I highly recommend you check it out. All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Why mainframes? Why now? You know, it seems like mainframes have been around seemingly forever, but there's been kind of a renewed interest in them, especially in the DevOps space, which is, you know, traditionally the mainframes have been considered kind of slow and kludgy and really not suitable for DevOps. But really mainframes, they offer a lot to the DevOps space, mostly because they provide an economy of scale that really you can't duplicate with other technologies. So in this webinar, what we hope to do is really talk about what's driving that interest and talk about some of the benefits that mainframes provide when it comes to DevOps. And then also what's changed in the industry to help drive some of that interest around mainframes. So just kind of going over a couple background things when that we took from the ebook. You know, there's this view of the world, as I said before, that mainframes are slow, they're kludgy, they're not agile. It's, you know, they're just, but really what you really kind of have to take a step back and take a look at mainframes from the larger perspective. I mean, you know, mainframes are powerful. You know, we talk about the IBM Z13 mainframe, for example, that can handle 2.5 billion transactions per day. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And they're the backbone of the transactional data, which basically means that a large number of mobile and or web-based applications rely on mainframes to do a lot of their back-end processing. So, you know, mainframes connect those systems of record with the systems of engagement, so that allows businesses to be more agile and to be more nimble with all their transactions. And that includes both the web-based and the on-premises applications. You know, and then something that needs to be considered with the mainframe conversation in general is the fact that we're now facing a skills shortage when it comes to mainframe skills. Think about it. They're not sexy technology. I mean, really.
Well,
Think about
so
well, okay, Rosalind, you got something.
yeah, so I think it's important to recognize that mainframes, as you say, run the world. I mean, they run the
Right.
banking industry, the insurance industry, they run the world. And they've been around a long time. And people have used them as the system that runs their business, but have not seen them as the sexy new thing. That doesn't mean they aren't. And so if you look at the mainframe today, if you look at the latest Z14, it is the most modern machine there is. It is capable of doing amazing things if you use it for that. And
Hmm.
so that's the change we need to make. We need people to understand, and that's why DevOps and why now and why mainframes now. People are starting to realize that this system that they've been using has all this value, and really the system itself is not old. It's just the way they're treating it is old. And
Right.
the mainframe skill shortage is the yes, it's true-ish. People say they can't get developers to work on the mainframe, and that's because they're using old processes, old tools, old ways of working. If you told somebody that they're working in that old technology, of course they're not going to want to do it. But if you say that this is the major banking system, and here's your Git and here's your current open tool chain, and you can do all the same kind of development, you do your same unit test, you just happen to write it in COBOL maybe, it's less of a shortage problem. It's less of
Hmm.
an issue. So it's important to keep that in mind as DevOps helps bring these new practices that the today's developers expect. Then that's why they can bring more people to the mainframe. People are less afraid of it because it's not so different.
Right. So it's a mindset as much as anything else when the way that the mainframes have been presented traditionally. And I
So
get that,
Char,
and I go ahead.
so Charlene, you mentioned what's different today than maybe in the past. To Rosalind's point, the mainframe is not that much different. Sure, it's got a whole bunch of characteristics that make it unique and an incredible value to enterprise solutions. But from a software development point of view, it's especially today integratable with technologies and software development processes, which have been traditionally more open systems oriented. And so it doesn't have to be scary, and it can be quote unquote sexy. Rosalind's correct.
And, and I would maybe also add to that. I mean, it helps to think of the problem in this issue in more of a, I would say, even a vertical way. Because if you think about your business processes and not necessarily about platforms, I mean, you can't say that you're agile or using DevOps if at the end of the day it all goes to the mainframe and there you're not using agile methodologies. I mean, the entire process is as strong as its weakest point. And so if you're not introducing DevOps principles, if you're not introducing agile principles to your mainframe, then you're not introducing them at all to the entire business process. So that's why it's imperative to do this on the mainframe. But the good news is that mainframes had been basically in line with these kinds of principles for many years. I mean, maybe not DevOps in terms of developers doing the operations, but automation and monitoring on mainframes really have been kind of the way that everybody else is on the in the open platform are trying to do it today. So it's not that big of a leap for mainframes to do DevOps, but I think it's more about integrating the processes so they're more kind of coherent processes through the entire stack, moving from the mainframes to whatever systems of engagement that you might have.
Okay. Those are all really good points, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Um, and another thing to point out is this third bullet is mainframes they're not going anywhere. They're going to be around for a long time. So, the companies that do have folks who have worked on them for a long time and say are retiring, the baby boomer generation nearing, if not already retired. So, and a lot of companies, they really haven't done much to replace a lot of the workers who have traditionally have worked on the mainframes. And so, I think it's imperative for these companies to really start to, as we talked about, change their mindset on mainframes and really ensure that their next generation of developers and programmers can work the mainframes and learn the COBOL and realize that the mainframes are a critical piece of technology for their company.
Yeah,
so Charlene, to your point, go ahead, Rosalind.
I was going to say that's exactly the point. The fact that people are talking about a mainframe skills shortage, and the fact that people really understand that it is their core business that runs on this system, they're starting to get worried finally. I don't know why it took so long, but they're starting to get worried over the fact that they've left this system just doing it the same way for so long. And there were people who told them, that's okay, you can leave it and it'll be okay. But that's not really true. No system that's not continually evolving, that's continually being supported and bringing on new blood is going to be as vibrant. And so if you have, and I've been in the industry 30 years, and if I'm the average age of the development team, 20 somethings don't necessarily want to join the team. Right. So because we haven't had this on bringing of people all this time, it's going to take this kickstart. It's going to take this. And DevOps is a great way to do it. It's a great way to say, okay, I'm bringing all of these modern practices to this platform that, oh, by the way, as was mentioned, it really already had some of them. We have generally had, source code being managed. We generally have a common build system. I mean, some of the practices that get brought in the distributed world are already there in the mainframe space. It's just that they're different and they're separate and they're isolated. And so no one understands them. So by bringing the teams together to common practices, having these people work together, they get the value out of the system that they have, and they get new people perfectly willing to work on the system. Dana?
Yeah, I was just going to comment that some analysis I did that says that 85% of daily transactions today are on the mainframe. So I kind of look at it like general electricity. It is running the world, and we don't know it because it runs it so well. I just wanted to say they are mainstay.
Okay.
And maybe I would add to that. I mean, more than anything, it's a cultural shift because, in terms of technology, of course, mainframes can do all of those things, but it's more of thinking of it in a way that it's not hierarchical. It's not a small bunch of people who are basically the sys programs and the people who basically control everything, and it's giving more control to the development teams, cross-functional teams and things like that. It's a more of a cultural thing. There are a lot of organizations that really get scared thinking about deploying to production in a way that's less controlled. But again, if you bring automation and good principles to all of that, this is absolutely doable, and it's even more robust than maybe the way that they have been doing it. But it's really kind of a shift in the way you think about it more than any kind of technological shift.
Okay, great points. Okay, so let's move on and look at how do we bring up DevOps to the mainframe, or even vice versa. So this is taken from the ebook. There are 4 things that companies can do to bring DevOps and mainframes together. And the first is to take advantage of the latest hardware improvements. Then make changes faster with lower risk in an open and modern environment. And create and optimize APIs for new workloads and refactor monolithic applications. And finally, automate the delivery pipeline and shift left testing. I imagine you guys have thoughts on any of these 4 things that companies can do?
Any and all. Any and all.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that in this process, many companies have not taken advantage of the latest systems because they haven't upgraded the compilers, they haven't done things to stay current. And it's harder to stay current when you have a philosophy that says, I only recompile the things that I change because I want to reduce risk, et cetera. And I don't have an automated pipeline from a testing standpoint. And so one of the things that with a DevOps transformation, it's now much easier to actually stay current. It's much easier to recompile more of the modules based on current compilers because I've got this automated testing framework. So everybody can take advantage of the machines they're running on. Every client I walk into, they have, well, I found a few exceptions, but most clients have modules they haven't recompiled in 20 plus years. And so obviously they aren't taking advantage of the current systems. And so that's just a small piece of what they could gain by staying current, making sure they're taking advantage of those things. And this process change and the automated testing makes it a lot easier for you to do all of the other experimentation, all of the other refactoring. Everybody's scared to death to refactor these monolithic applications because they're there and nobody, well,
and they work.
Nobody who wrote them, yeah, and they work, and the people that wrote them are retired or dead. So
Right.
You've got to do something. With automated testing, you can be a lot more confident that you can refactor, expose those as APIs, and drive new business.
So do you think it's kind of a mindset of, if it's not broke, don't touch it, don't fix it. It's working fine as it is. If you push that button, you're going to mess everything up. So just leave it alone. Do you think, that's kind of a factor there?
It absolutely is. It's a factor in almost all the clients I walk into because they are worried about breaking this very critical system and they don't really understand it entirely. I mean, there are exceptions. There's some companies that are well down this DevOps path. They really understand their systems, but there's so many others that just aren't there yet, and they're worried. They're worried about changing processes and they're worried about changing the code because it works. And if you make a change, who knows?
So I think at the core, the companies that are really successful, Charlene, are ones that recognize the mainframe has to be central to their digital transformation. It has to be central to their strategy of moving the business forward. And I think there's a quote in your ebook that talks about a study which shows 200 million incremental revenue for companies that have actually taken and made the mainframe a central part of their digital transformation. So many of these things you talk about, like they don't want to make changes and what have you, are hinged by the fact that they aren't taking the mainframe as a central part of their DevOps or their digital transformation.
That's a good point.
I would add another element to that. I mean, the risk is definitely a big element, but also, and again, that's something that you mentioned in the book, it's the ROI. It's hard to make the case for an ROI for, going, doing DevOps. It's too general of a concept. And of course, I mean, you can look at the problem and try to kind of speculate what kind of value you will get out of it. But it's in doing it in a kind of a boil the ocean approach, it's hard to justify in terms of ROI. But if you think of the problem in terms of taking a specific project, so I'm not talking about what do I get from moving everything to DevOps, but what do I get by doing this specific project that I need to do, doing it in 3 months rather than 18 months. That's a more kind of quantifiable ROI. So doing it in an approach that kind of cuts away different projects and doing those starting small and then expanding once you get a good grasp of the ROI, that might be a better approach, both in kind of understanding the risk and understanding that they might not be all that huge of a risk as you thought, but also in understanding the overall ROI that you will get and the value that you will get out of this process. So I think really the secret here is knowing where exactly to start, how to scope a specific use case and starting from there and then growing it, to wherever level it needs to get.
All right, well, that's actually a great seg into my next slide, which is some of the easy steps, we say easy, that companies can take, to really push DevOps and mainframes closer together. And so, we always say start small, but first you need to determine really what needs to be Agile or DevOps, and so choose only those applications for which you are seeing a lot of change or demand for a high volume of change. So from there, you can actually look at the future development. So as I said, start small, look at what needs to change first before what can change. And then, as you move on, obviously, future development will fit that kind of Agile DevOps mold more than probably a lot of the current development, because the future stuff is more likely to kind of support that fast pace, that online or mobile systems that a lot of companies are using these days. So just realize you're gonna kind of start slow and then bank up. What do you guys think about that first step? I mean, does that seem like a good place to start for companies, and have I missed something there?
So I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this in lines of wrapping it with understanding where your business is going, what applications are most critical in your immediate future and your immediate business objectives you're trying to set. So I think it's understanding, after you understand where your priorities are at a business level, understanding then where you need to focus on Agile and DevOps. Go ahead, Rosalind.
Yeah. So as Dana said, you got to focus on business priorities. And since it is a transformation, people don't necessarily want to choose the highest, most important business application first, though some people do. You pick something that's important, but maybe not the most important. It depends on what your risk spectrum is. You pick something that's in that spectrum and you start somewhere, but it's the same as the distributed side. When a company adopts DevOps in their organization, they don't say tomorrow everybody's DevOps. You do exactly the same thing in the mainframe side that you did on the distributed side. You pick a team, you have them move, you learn, you experiment, you play, and you move on, and the next team comes in. There are many different examples of organizations rolling out DevOps, and that's just the way you do it. You pick something and you start. And in the end, you need to move everything. You can't leave anything behind, because if you do, then nobody's going to know how to do that old process. And you really need to change the fundamental processes underneath. The change review board, for example, is one that is so strong in the mainframe, and depending on the organization, strong all over. But the way it works, the way it processes, is going to have to change. So this is an organizational change process that you start small and you grow, but you're changing the processes around it as well. And so in the end, you're going to end up changing everything. Start one place, move forward, and learn. Different teams are actually going to want to work slightly differently. And as long as they're following the standards, that's okay. Let there be some variability in the way teams individually work, as long as they're delivering the value that is needed within a set of guardrails, a set of requirements, and you get the best value out of this process.
And maybe to add to one of Rosalind's points there about specifically about the external system. I mean, it's important to understand to notice that when you pick a specific area to start with, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's necessarily the right way to think about it as in terms of a mainframe DevOps process, because it is an integrated process. It's rarely the case that you would have a process on the mainframe that doesn't have anything to do with something, with some another application, another platform, another system of engagement outside of it. and the dev process needs to be continuous and it needs to be fully integrated. So when you consider where to start, I think a good consideration to have is what is the process outside of the mainframe and how can I integrate it and have kind of a more coherent process. Because if I just think of it as in terms of the platform, I just think of my mainframe as an island, that approach, usually you will hit the obstacles when you will try to, for example, deploy an entire application with everything in it, and think of it as kind of what makes business sense, because nobody cares, if a specific transaction on the mainframe, is failing. They care about business functionality that's not working. So you need to think of the problem as a continuum rather than separating it into the different platforms.
Yeah, and that is actually one of the absolute key points. It is important to remember that ZOS development is not different. It is the same. You're writing code, you're testing code, you're deploying code. So there is no excuse to say I have a different pipeline for my ZOS side. There's no excuse to say that the distributed teams get all these nice new fancy tools and the Z guys have to live with whatever. Or you need to bring the teams together. They need a common pipeline, a common way of doing things, and a common set of capability. One managed backlog that shows all of the work that everybody needs to do. And as was said, applications don't just run on the mainframe. They run distributed Z, middleware, networking, etc. All of that work needs to be visible and everybody needs to see it. So it's not mainframe DevOps. The reason we talk about DevOps-ing the mainframe is most of the rest of the organizations have already been DevOpsed and the mainframe was left out. So now we're trying to bring it into that spectrum of, it's the part that's slowing you down now because you haven't invested in transforming its processes.
So kind of all things created equal, kind of putting it on the same level as all of the other processes in the organization. That makes a lot of sense. And do you think a lot of that is something that can be addressed by a lot of the tools that organizations already have for their other areas that have been quote unquote DevOpsed?
So I generally, when I go into companies, say, what's your distributed pipeline? Okay, let's use that. Now, there's some catches there, there's some caveats, but for example, many organizations have chosen Git as their SEM, so fine. Whatever tool you've chosen for your work items and planning system, it doesn't matter. Z's not different from a requirements or story breakdown. Whatever tool you're using, there's no reason you can't use it for ZOS development. There are other spaces where there are going to be different tools. It may be a different language, but it may be a different language. That's a normal thing. People do iOS development, they do .NET development, they do Java development. Okay, now they do COBOL, they do PL1, you're just adding another language. And you may have different testing tools because, it's slightly different. You may do things, a slightly different way, but in general, the pipeline itself can be consistent. There's no reason for it not to be.
So when I've talked to customers, I find that it needs to be a collaborative process. So, DevOps is about collaboration across organization, breaking down silos. In order for the enterprise, meaning the distributed team as well as the mainframe team, to work in a collaborative way, they need to come to the table together and talk about, and in Rosalind's point, maybe we start with a pipeline on the distributed side and understand it and use that as a model to expand, but it needs to be a collaborative way, not that the distributed guys come in and say, this is the perfect model, now you need to go figure out how to make that work on the mainframe. It needs to be collaborative. It needs to be the operations team dealing with the software development team. Frequently, the developers say, I need this, and the system programmers guys go, I don't understand why we need this. We talk about bringing the development, distributed side development with the mainframe development. It's about sitting at the table, understanding the objectives that you want to achieve, the challenges, the risks, and talking about how do I get to, faster delivery, higher quality delivery, and an automated pipeline.
Yeah, and breaking down those silos so people are collaborating and working together. And that's just got to happen. We can't have DevOps, it was all about dev and ops coming together. Well, really not. It's really about business, dev, quality, test, security, and everybody coming together. Well, this really just says we really need to do that organizational wide. It really is about everyone, whether or not you're a Z developer or Z ops or distributed or network or business or test or security. All of the teams have to come together to collaborate to make this solution work.
And with regards to tooling, it's no different than the normal buy versus build equation. But a specific consideration that's even more important in this situation would be that no matter what tool you're using, it's extra important for it to be open and flexible and not corner you into any kind of proprietary black box kind of solutions, because again, you will need to share the process within a lot of different platforms throughout the organization. So it's extremely important for it to be able to do this. Whatever tooling you're using, there are very robust tooling out there already. Some of the product mentioned in the book also there, but it's extremely important to make sure that you will be able to incorporate those into whatever process you want to do, no matter what the platform.
Okay, great. So moving along on these steps, just basic, any major project that you do in a company, obviously you start small, and then you start with one group, one project, and kind of learn from that, get your experience, gain your best practices, and then slowly but surely build it out and expand the number of projects and teams who are using that more DevOps methodology. And then the last one is, talk about the mainframe as, the way that we've been talking about it. It's a critical part of your infrastructure. It's integral to all of your processes. Stop thinking about it as, the old uncle in the other room who is more of a problem than an asset. So it's critical that changing of the mindset as well, that companies really consider the mainframe as that critical piece of infrastructure. Okay, APIs. I will freely admit I'm not the smartest person in the world when it comes to APIs, so I think probably the best thing for us to do is to actually have you guys discuss how your companies approach APIs. And I know that APIs, obviously they are critical in the whole digital transformation conversation, and in the mainframe they're not going to be any different. So why don't we, Ziv, why don't you start, if you don't mind, and talk about the way that OpenLegacy has actually approached this APIs conversation with mainframes.
Sure. So basically what OpenLegacy does is automatically generate microservices-based APIs from legacy systems, of course, the mainframe being one, a big one in those legacy systems. And the reason APIs are very important is because they are basically kind of becoming, or have become, the common language for all components to talk. So if you talk about APIs, usually what you would hear a lot is about external APIs. These are the more kind of easily understandable APIs where we just publish open APIs to the public, and that really enables you to interact with with the API economy, as it were. But it's important to know that the number varies, but around 70–80% of APIs are internal APIs, not external APIs. And internal APIs are internal, exactly that. I mean, they are basically meant to be consumed inside the organization for many reasons. So for some reasons are application reasons, so just applications talking to applications inside the organization. And some of them are for automation of processes, which is exactly what DevOps is about. So creating those APIs from the mainframe is a key element of bringing the mainframe to that DevOps conversation. And basically that allows it to be a participant in those processes. And really, I mean, of course, the mainframe is the source of truth in a lot of cases. It's the system of record, but it doesn't necessarily need to be, for example, to do channel logic, because channels are more customer facing. So the ability to just to reach the mainframe as an API interface and basically do all the channel logic in other places, and maybe the last mile of the customer facing the UI on another level, basically that's enabled by dividing it into different APIs, producers and consumers. So I think APIs are really key. They're the glue of these processes, but it's a kind of an ecosystem of concepts that needs to be implemented together in order to really get to the results that you want to get.
Okay, great. Rosalind, why don't you, if you could please talk about how you guys at IBM WebSphere our ZOS are approaching the APIs.
Right, so it's important to remember that in many ways APIs are the current name for the industry trend that we used to call SOA. So if companies had gone down the services-oriented architecture path and they had defined more services, then they were starting down this path. But as was said, APIs are at multiple layers, and really you want to build a set of internal APIs that are services that your organization provides that can then be composed to provide the business services that you want to expose externally, either as APIs externally or as function you're exposing as part of your digital transformation. So they are the core of the way people work. And if you think about it, back in the old days, a Kix transaction, IMS transaction, that was actually basically a nice little API. It was a service that provided a set of value. Today, most people think of APIs as REST-based APIs because that's the technology we like to use as an interface. But there are all sorts of different ways of accessing and exposing APIs that people have done over the years. And many people have used WebSphere as a gateway to provide a set of services to get to their back-end systems. Now, that's just one way. ZOS Connect is another excellent way to expose existing ZOS function. So your Kix transaction, your DB2 data, take your choice. Any function you want to expose as a REST service, you can easily expose it as a service and then make it available either internally or externally. And then it can hook into an API gateway, such as the IBM API Manager or other API managers, so that you can use them in that composition of external services or expose them externally as value for someone else to use as a service. So there are lots of other technologies that have been used over the years to create these services, but the focus on providing an API that provides a specific set of function trending toward a microservice. I don't know, I mean, there's lots of specific definitions of microservices, and people will argue for a while as to what that is. But if you think about this small composable service that we're trying to provide, that then I can put together and create this business API is where people need to get to. And the mainframe has so many of these systems that are available. Just exposing them to the rest of the organization is a key critical step.
And if I might, I would challenge a bit the idea of APIs being kind of the next version of SOA. And the reason I say that is because there is a fundamental change in the way APIs are thought about and the way SOA was thought about. So in terms of SOA, I mean, who is the owner of the service? In terms of SOA, it's the integration team. There's a central team that does the integration part, and all the web services or whatever services that are exposed basically belongs or are owned by that integration team. But in line with the mentality of a DevOps, in an API kind of architecture and an API framework, the API belongs to the development teams. And I think that's not just a nuance. I think that's a fundamental shift in terms of agility, in terms of the ability to kind of have a kind of a cross-functional teams that takes the business process from beginning to end. I think that's a major shift. I mean, the technology might be. I mean, there are different technologies and different way of approaching that. But I think that's a major shift in thinking about integration as part of the application building process rather than its own a unique domain that somebody else is in charge of.
So I think it depends on how you adopted SOA. So if you were in many organizations, this SOA transformation meant that I built a set of services as an application developer that could then be exposed and put together on the ESB. So in the organizations that actually moved forward with SOA appropriately, they actually started building these separate composable APIs. They were web services at the time rather than REST services. But those companies that did that right and had the application development teams building these services now have found a very easy transition to now exposing these services by the development team as REST-based interfaces instead. So it does depend on how you thought about SOA, absolutely. It does depend on the organization and the way they thought about it. But many organizations did think about it in exactly the same way that we're thinking about with APIs, with the development team is building this function and exposing it. And they're developing this API that is their contract to the outside world. And they're the development team providing this function, which is also why I think there's a very important distinction of the point you made about internal and external services, because I believe internal developers are going to build a set of internal services that are not business services, but they are APIs that provide a set of value that will then be composed as business services.
Absolutely, and I absolutely agree with the idea that you had to do SOA the right way. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations did not do it the right way, but those who did it the right way, they are prime position now to kind of to move to the digital transformation in a very kind of smooth way. I would add to your last point. I mean, one thing that I think is important, the granularity of services coming from the mainframe is very important, because it's my point of view, and I know that not everybody shares that point of view, that it doesn't really make sense to expose outside of the mainframe things that don't have business meaning outside of the mainframe. So, I mean, mainframe services might be very specific, might be very kind of granular, and orchestrating them outside of the mainframe doesn't really necessarily make sense. So I think it's very important, to your point, to kind of really think about the granularity of what you want to expose internally, of course, as well as externally. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that point, that a lot of thought is needed in terms of understanding exactly what is the first level of API that I'm exposing from my mainframe, and having it useful on one side, but not overly granular on the other side.
And,
okay,
and
go ahead.
And not also too large. I mean, we also want to be careful that they don't get too large, but absolutely, yes.
Okay, Dana, I don't want you to feel left out here. So talk to us a little bit about how CA approaches the APIs.
Clearly, if I get off mute. Sorry.
That's all right.
So, I mean, CA equally understands and is an ambassador to the importance of APIs. The CA API gateway automatically creates microservices as well, and we have cataloging capability. So, +1 to all the conversations we've already been having here on this topic. So I don't want to repeat that. I think APIs are critical to the services that a mainframe provides to the larger enterprise. I would say APIs, when I talk to customers, also play a very key role in how do I automate the pipeline, how do I automate testing so that it's consistent and reproducible and reduce the amount of variance in the test so that I can repeat it swiftly. So I think APIs play a very critical role in the business and providing value, but they also play a very critical role in automation and building a DevOps pipeline, continuous delivery pipeline.
Okay. All right, great. Let's see. So, at the end of the day, we're talking about the ROI. What, really how can mainframes contribute more to the company's bottom line and actually be more than just that engine that runs all the processes. I mean, how can companies capitalize further on their current investments? So, you guys obviously, you all have opinions on where you see the biggest ROI coming from when it comes to mainframes, but just talking about the basics, we've got an investment that companies have made in this technology, and there's no way that they're going to throw that out. So companies need to find a way to capitalize further on that technology. And along with that, they need to capitalize on the tools that they have running their DevOps processes already in their organization and see what will be usable or what can be used on the mainframe also to further their DevOps investment. And then also just the ability to use the mainframe for more of the applications that the company is currently doing or would like to do. So what do you guys think? Are there other ROI points that we haven't actually, that's not listed here? Or, is this something that's just so stupidly obvious that we really don't even really need to talk about it? Or
Maybe I would stress the point that an overwhelming majority of organizations are not making the best use of the combination of the context that they get from the channels of engagement with the customer and the data that resides in their core applications. I mean, just matching those things together can be so powerful, and most organizations are still not at the stage where they're making the best out of that potential.
That's a good point.
So
go ahead, Dana. No, go ahead, Dana.
So in the ebook, you earlier in charts, you talked about the 4 steps: taking advantage of the hardware, taking advantage of faster change, optimizing APIs, and automated delivery pipeline. I have to say, when I look at that, there's an ROI in each of those boxes. Mm-hmm. I know in the ebook you talk extensively about leveraging the power of the Z14, Z13, and the fact that you can add specialty processors and all that, and to the extent that they are already there and not being used, there's a good ROI there. Talk about moving software development, making changes faster, getting feedback from customers, and adapting quickly has its own ROI, brings its own value to the business. And having the APIs, we've kind of rode that horse in the last conversation, and clearly having an automated delivery pipeline that delivers high quality, high secure applications quickly has an incredible return to the business. So I kind of looked at it as there's an ROI in each of those categories. It takes different factors into place. Rosalind?
Yeah, I think your first point is really, in many ways, they have an investment in this mainframe system, and they're not getting out of it necessarily all of what they can get out of it. So they've got this built-in spend right now on this system to allow them to do the business that they're doing. And with this transformation, they can get more out of that existing system. They can bring more value to the organization, and that is measurable. They can see the return on this transformation through faster delivery, through being able to adopt new markets, through all sorts of these different aspects. And a key piece of DevOps actually is, through visibility, automation, transparency, the ability to actually measure what you're doing. So you actually have better metrics once you're in the system, so that you can better measure the return that you're doing. And if you do DevOps right, then it's a continual improvement process. So you're continually removing waste and you're continually improving. And so you can continually see the return on the investment of the transformation. Organizations that take advantage of this existing asset are the ones that are going to disrupt the industry because they have these assets. The startups don't have that. They're disrupting based on fast start. If you can get to the market with this existing capability, you can disrupt the disruptors.
Interesting point. Okay.
And maybe to add to this point, I mean, just it's not just about, and that point was raised. I mean, it's not just about cost reduction or doing what you wanted already to do in faster, but it also kind of opens up new opportunity for new business models. So I would just give a couple of examples from some of our customers that shall be unnamed, but basically one customer that had an M&A strategy that basically said, well, we're only going to buy other financial institutions, in this case, that have shared the same core application as we do, because it's easier for us to integrate. Once it's easier for them to integrate with those with other systems because of their processes, because of their move to APIs, then that opens up a whole new field of M&As that are possible for them. So that on that front, but also, I mean, another customer that wanted to have a strategy of cooperating with a lot of different fintechs and startups, and if it takes them about 12 months to, or something like that, 9 to 12 months to set up everything in order to do this cooperation, then there's a limited number of startups that they can cooperate with in a set amount of time. But if it takes them, I don't know, 2 to 3 months, then it opens up a lot of more opportunities for them. So it's really, I mean, it's not just about cost reduction. It really is about enabling new different business models that really kind of opens it up for the business side of the institution to really kind of think, more on more granular scale even.
That makes a lot of sense, and it's a really good point, and I think that also becomes easier for companies to really visualize once they do see some ROI from their investment in moving to DevOps using the mainframe. So that's a really good point. Okay, doing a quick time check, we are about 7 minutes to the top of the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and push forward and let our panelists give a little 1 or 2 minute spiel on their company and how they're helping DevOps in general. So Dana, I'm going to go ahead and start with you and let you do your thing here.
Sure. Thank you. From a CA point of view, we look at a modern software factory, which is not just mainframe. It's across the whole enterprise. And as I've said, achieving business objectives at the enterprise level. Clearly, speed to market with high quality and high security are the driving factors behind this software factory. And we believe that the mainframe is a central part to achieving successful digital transformation. And in order to achieve all this, we're bringing tools to the market as well as easy access to the assets that are on the mainframe so that we can address bringing new skills to the platform in a way that they're familiar with and comfortable with, and integrating into open system solutions that are pretty predominant in the market. we have a whole set of offerings around automating the pipeline so that you have continuous delivery and continuous integration all the way from idea to delivery. And we have integration from the operations side back into development. So we have automated feedback loop so that when problems are found in operations, they can be quickly put into the development process so that changes can be made appropriately. That's kind of a quick summary.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you, Dana. Rosalind, why don't you go ahead now?
So from mainframe and DevOps, obviously, I mean, we build the machine such that we can improve its processes and capability. And we've been focusing on making the machine and the software itself DevOpsable. That's the best way of putting it. Trying to remove, we're trying to remove, and we have been focused on removing all of the differences that serve absolutely no purpose and focusing on the core value of the platform. So the platform with its pervasive encryption, the platform with its capability of high transaction throughput processing, bringing new languages to the platform. We want it to be the most, and it is, the most modern platform and available for you. We've also been focusing on providing the ability to use your distributed tools, those open source tools for the platform, and investing to make sure that open source development processes are completely supported so that you don't just use your distributed pipeline if that's what you've chosen to use, and it is an open source pipeline. We want that to work. We want to remove all of the ways or the barriers that the system puts in place to stop you from doing things just the same way as anything else. Now, keep in mind, that's not removing any of the qualities of service of the system. We want to make sure that it is a shared system that provides this high throughput transaction processing with security, with protection. But there's no reason to just have tools that are different just for the sake of difference. And so that's what we've been focused on. We spend a lot of time with clients understanding how they can modernize, they can expose those services via APIs, and make sure that the Z platform itself is seen as the modern platform. The Kix development team is one of our example teams that does a beta build every night. Beta quality build, full automated testing. They're showing a full integrated DevOps pipeline, building a product such as Kix to demonstrate that you can do it. Anybody can.
Okay, great. Okay, Zeev, tell us about OpenLegacy, what you guys are doing.
Sure. So the OpenLegacy platform is basically it's a platform that's absolutely focused on generating automatically digital services, basically microservices-based APIs, and doing it in a way that, first of all, doesn't make any changes on the backend application. You don't need to change anything there. And it might be any number of different backend application and legacy applications. Of course, mainframes are a big part of that. And basically standardizing. So those microservices are completely standard microservices built on very familiar frameworks such as Spring Boot and other open source frameworks. So basically what you're doing is kind of jumping over, I don't know, 20 years of technology into a very modern microservices architecture that is very in line with DevOps principles. So you can work agile, you can integrate into any kind of DevOps pipeline, and it's very open both in terms of the pipeline itself, but also in terms of the deployment environments. It can be deployable to any kind of cloud environment or, of course, on-prem. So it's basically accelerates the process of creating digital services, and to a point where things that organizations take 4-6 months to do on the OpenLegacy platform, they can do basically in a day. So that's about it.
All right, great. Well, I'm looking at the time and we are just about at the top of the hour. We have less than 1 minute. So unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but I do want to let everybody know who did put in a question that our panelists will be receiving a copy of all of the questions. So I'm confident that they'll follow up with you guys post-event and answer any questions that you do have. Also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, you will be receiving a link to the webinar on demand so you can access it there. Attendees also will be receiving a link to the ebook that this webinar is based on. And the webinar and the ebook are also both located on DevOps.com. So if you don't get the link for whatever reason, you can always check the website there and access both the ebook and the webinar on demand there. While you're at DevOps.com, feel free to take a look at some of the other webinars we have coming up on tap. We've got a lot of really good ones, so hopefully there'll be one or two that you find interesting. Rosalind, Dana, Zeev, thank you all for joining me today for this webinar. It's been a great fun. I hope the audience got a lot out of it. I know I did. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And thank you, everybody, for joining me today. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.